King of the Hill is a show defined by familial relationships. At the heart of the series is Hank, his son Bobby, and their struggles to find connection through their vastly different worldviews. But resting above that relationship is a man named Cotton Hill. He killed fitty men, lost his shins in the war, and is the root of a lot of the generational trauma that has been passed down through Hank and Bobby. But despite Cotton being an unjustifiably awful father, husband, and human being, his life and general existence is actually pretty tragic. It's fascinating to look at the circumstances surrounding his pain and his resentment, and though it doesn't excuse his behavior, it does paint a nuanced picture of a very sad man. So join me as we look at the tragic life and death of Cotton Hill. But first, I want to thank today's video sponsor, Babbel. Learning a new language can be daunting, but there are so many reasons to expand your lingual skills. As someone with Italian ancestry, I've actually been recently looking into Italian citizenship through Ancestry. But that process can be made so much easier for me if I just learn some basic Italian communication. So I've started doing Italian lessons via Babbel, which is such a great and versatile tool for learning language. Grazie.
Grazie, signor Rossi.
Babbel not only has a variety of ways to learn for people with different learning styles, such as lessons, podcasts, games, and videos, but they also provide real-world, practical conversation skills based on what you need best in your language journey. The lessons are as short as 10 minutes apiece and can easily be integrated into even the busiest schedules. This tech is award-winning and has been proven to get people speaking a new language in just 3 weeks. If you sign up with the link in the description, you can get 65% off your subscription to Babbel. Once again, if you use that link in the description, you'll get 65% off your subscription and can begin your language journey today. Cotton Hill joined the military during World War II when he was only 14 years old. Over the course of the series, Cotton told countless stories about his time in the war, though there are disputes in regards to whether or not every story is fact. Some of the things he claims don't quite line up.
Well, how did my dad fight in Germany and Japan at the same time?
But what we do know is that while fighting in Japan, Cotton's shins were basically shot off. His account of this incident is brutal and includes him beating his assailants to death with his own friend's leg.
I woke up in a field hospital, and they were sewing my feet to my knees.
This is obviously the major defining event in Cotton's life. He was allegedly 6'4" before he lost his shins and 5 foot even after he lost them. It's easy to see how this could make somebody resentful. His doctor even said he would never be able to walk again, but Cotton is nothing if not stubborn.
18 months later, he walked right over to that doctor, reached up, and punched him in the kidneys.
Now, obviously, Cotton was raised in a different time, and he had a lot of resentment and trauma built from his experience in World War II, and these things dictated how he treated his son Hank growing up, which is to say, not good. And it didn't help that Hank's birth itself prevented Cotton from achieving a major goal of his own, assassinating Cuban dictator Fidel Castro in New York City. So resentment was all too familiar for Cotton in nearly every aspect of his life, but in particular for his son Hank.
He was crying the second he popped his head out of his mama.
In fact, the way Cotton raised Hank very effectively explains so much about who Hank became as a man. Cotton suffered such hardships that he had absolutely no empathy for his son, even when he was a literal child.
I got my shins blown off by a Japan man's machine gun. So don't come crying to me with your problems.
Cotton never gave Hank any positive support or encouragement. Hank's failures were met with derision from a very young age.
You're never gonna be a war hero like me if you shoot like that. No wonder that kid from the playground stole your pail.
As he got older, this didn't let up either. In fact, it arguably got worse. Cotton outright told Hank to his face what he thought would happen if he had gotten drafted.
Some of you, like Hank, will be killed.
Even through Hank's high school career, Cotton would blame him for things that he had absolutely no control over, like when he broke his ankle in the big football game.
This is your fault. And you got them weak ankles from your mommy.
He was a miserably awful father to Hank, and this led Hank to develop into the incredibly repressed man we see in King of the Hill. Any sign of emotion, or weakness as Cotton would consider it, is now buried deep inside of Hank. In fact, I think there are maybe only 3 times we see Hank cry over the course of the show. When he thinks Bill dies, when Lady Bird runs away, and when his truck is breaking down, but I can't really think of any others. Cotton's attempt at a sex talk for Hank consisted of bringing him to a farm to watch a bull mate with a cow, which likely contributed to Hank's immense sexual repression we see throughout the show as well.
I don't think I've ever seen you guys kiss.
Your father has kissed me.
Peggy!
But Cotton's mistreatment of Hank goes even further than his childhood and teenage years. Over the course of the series, we see Cotton mistreat Hank on a regular basis, and it often undermines Hank's own life and relationships. In Season 2's premiere, Hank and Bobby are connecting over sport shooting competitions, but Hank initially struggles to find his shot because of his traumatic memories of his father teaching him to use a rifle. Hank eventually works through those issues and does really well in the competition until Cotton shows up, regressing Hank.
I got money riding on this shot. On the McKays.
Cotton is persistently questioning Hank's manhood and putting him down, but aside from this, he also refuses to show him even the simplest common courtesy. When Hank was temporarily blinded, Cotton wouldn't even let him touch his shoulder to guide him into the house. Late in the series, when Cotton is giving up his Cadillac, Hank wants to buy it, partially because he took care of the car his entire life, but also so that he could have something that connects him with his father. A father he feels he has very little connection with. Cotton instead decides to give the car away to Hank's cousin Dusty.
Dusty's always been like a son to me.
I'm your son.
Oh yeah, and Hank's cousin Dusty is actually none other than ZZ Top, the famous musician who has countless cars and no need for Cotton's Cadillac. Cotton even pretends to be sorry about this to Hank later in the episode, but only to create drama for Dusty's reality TV show. And Cotton's disrespect for Hank gets even more blatant as well. In one episode, he plays keep away with Hank's gluteal prosthetic, something he needs for his debilitating back pain. In another, he gets Hank drunk, strips him naked, ties him up, and locks him in the Alamo. He relentlessly mistreats his son throughout his entire life, and Hank continues to try and make his father proud, though it does reach a boiling point a few times. In the episode The Father, the Son, and JC, Hank actually pushes back on Cotton's mistreatment in one of the most meaningful ways he ever has. Because of Cotton's nature, Hank was never comfortable expressing his feelings towards his father, likely because he actually wasn't a quality father figure in his life. But one person who did support Hank in ways that Cotton never did was Buck Strickland. Now, Buck is obviously not a perfect father figure either. Hank basically keeps Strickland Propane running and doesn't get the credit he deserves. At least until this episode, when Buck decides to promote him from assistant manager to manager. But Hank's repression and unresolved paternal trauma cause him to blurt out something pretty embarrassing in response.
Mr. Strickland, I love you.
This actually loses Hank the promotion, but interestingly, it also causes jealousy in Cotton, who goes so far as to uninvite his own son from Christmas dinner. This is such an interesting premise because the core of the conflict is so contradictory to how Cotton carries himself and treats Hank. He expects the love and adoration that Hank gives Buck without actually doing any of the legwork to earn it. And this episode even showcases likely the most resentment for Cotton we've ever seen from Hank as well.
I hate the man. Huh. Feels good every time I say it.
In fact, after extensive therapy-like conversations with Jimmy Carter, the absolute closest to reconciliation these two get is admitting that they wouldn't obliterate the other one from existing. They simply agree that they would like to continue to exist in the same world as the other one, and nothing more.
My father said he wouldn't obliterate me? His words?
The level of repression and resentment these two feel for each other is incredibly unhealthy, but it makes for some great TV. In one of the final moments of the episode, Hank and Cotton bond over their shared appreciation for shooting nail guns, and I think that this is probably the closest Cotton will ever come to telling his son he loves him. Which is pretty sad, but this is still a sweet moment.
Boy, I love shooting a nail gun.
I love shooting a nail gun too.
And Cotton's resentment extends beyond Hank as well. Cotton has a habit of expecting people to suffer and experience the same things he has, at least to a degree. I actually showed a clip from the pilot episode earlier that illustrates this. Cotton writes off Hank's scraped knee because he himself lost his shins. He judges Hank's experience against his own and feels it isn't worth feeling any pity over, and he treats a lot of people this way throughout the show. In the episode An Officer and a Gentle Boy, we see it in action. Hank decides Bobby needs some firmer boundaries in his life, and he and Cotton decide to send him to Cotton's old military academy, Fort Burke, to toughen him up. Interestingly, Cotton never even offered Hank the opportunity to go to Fort Burke, despite Hank wishing he could go. Hank wanted so desperately to get his father's approval, but Cotton wasn't even willing to offer an opportunity to impress him. It's another level of resentment. Bobby's time at Fort Burke is different though. The school changed a lot over the years. The punishments and hazing rituals softened significantly. Of course, this doesn't work for Cotton, who suddenly resents the school for not offering the same harsh environment that he himself faced as a kid. So he takes over the school and shapes it back to its former ways. But to Cotton's shock, Bobby is more resilient than anybody could have expected. He He handles Cotton's hazing and punishments with ease, including solitary confinement in the hole for 3 days, one entire day longer than Cotton spent there. And on top of it, Bobby is barely even bothered when he emerges. This sort of shakes the foundation of Cotton's worldview, as Bobby's kind and softer nature would, to him, suggest that he would never handle such difficulties. But maybe the way Bobby carries himself actually makes him stronger than the generations that come before. This is really one of the only times that Cotton acknowledges his way might not be the best way, and even so, it's a fleeting moment, because throughout the show, Cotton treats just about everyone he meets with the regressive attitude of his era, particularly the women. There are smaller instances, like how after Luann fixes Cotton's car, he scoffs at the very idea that she could have done this sort of quote-unquote man's work.
That's like a pig trying to read.
Pig?
Or when Reverend Stroop starts to work in Arlen for the first time, and he immediately starts to recite from memory all of the verses of the Bible that suggest she shouldn't be able to preach.
Women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission. Corinthians.
And then there's of course the way he treats his own wife, Dee Dee. He basically uses her as a live-in maid to do his bidding, and of course rub his legs with shin jelly. In fact, when the family was in dire straits financially, Cotton left Dee Dee because she tried to work for herself to support them. It's a real deep-seated resentment stemming from the time in which he was raised, and that stubbornness harms himself along with his loved ones. Cotton wasn't even around when Dee Dee gave birth to his son GH. Bobby drove Dee Dee to the hospital and cut the umbilical cord. Hell, Bobby basically was the only one taking care of the kid for the first week out of the hospital. Cotton did nothing to support his wife, who was experiencing extreme postpartum depression. Though I think perhaps the most interesting relationship in regards to Cotton's backwards views on women is none other than Peggy Hill, or Hank's wife as he refers to her. I actually don't think there's a single time where Cotton calls her Peggy. It's always Hank's wife, which is pretty representative of the way he views women in relation to men. To Cotton, Peggy only has value as Hank's wife, not as her own person. And any problems with the Hill household, those are Peggy's fault, not Hank's.
Hank, your wife let the salt run out. Flour, sugar, dog food, soda pop.
The first real appearance of Cotton in season 1 pretty much revolves around this. Cotton effectively forces his way into staying with Hank and Peggy. Peggy immediately objects and doesn't want him staying with them, pointing out how awful his behavior is and suggesting it's not good for Bobby to see that. But Hank, constantly seeking his father's approval, makes excuses for Cotton and ignores Peggy.
You just cannot see your father for who he is.
And sure enough, Cotton's awful behavior rubs off on Bobby in the worst ways. But when Hank tries to confront Cotton, he tells him his pitiable sob story about his shins to try and weasel out of any sort of confrontation or accountability. Which of course works on Hank, who, as we've established, has a very broken relationship to his father. But it comes to a head when Bobby starts a sexist riot at school.
That's woman's work. Ain't that right, fellas? Women's work. Women's work.
Fortunately, while Hank is repressed and has some stubborn viewpoints, he's a good and decent man who ultimately loves and supports his wife. And he knows that Cotton's worldview and behavior isn't acceptable.
And I won't let him grow up to be a woman-hating old fool. No wonder Mom left you. She was a strong lady, classy and smart like Peg.
Now, I've talked a lot about Peggy, and we all know that she's got some very frustrating personality traits, but I think it's undeniable that through all of the abuse she suffered from Cotton, she seemed to grow to understand him better than almost anyone else.
This is about a man who, for 50 years, denied any human emotion so he could hide from his haunting memories of war, ruining his relationship with his son.
Peggy and Cotton almost had a symbiotic antagonistic relationship with one another, as though their resentment for one another also fueled them. After Peggy broke all her bones in that skydiving accident, she struggled immensely with her physical therapy, but it was actually Cotton who motivated her and helped her regain her strength. Cotton was able to use his boot camp-like tactics to continue to berate and abuse Peggy. That abuse was the fuel Peggy needed to try and succeed in spite of Cotton, and it worked. I would say that this was the closest Peggy and Cotton ever came to an actual functioning relationship, nearly a friendship even.
Cotton, may I have this dance?
This, of course, wasn't a lasting bond, but I do think their rivalry was incredibly important to the series, which to me is pretty explicitly proven by her role in Cotton's final episode, Death Picks Cotton, but we'll get there soon. And outside of this, there were just countless ways that Cotton mistreated Peggy throughout the series, sometimes even suggesting horrific things.
Remember, under no circumstances is the wife allowed in my Cadillac car. unless she's in a bag in the trunk.
But Cotton's stubborn, ancient, and outdated views do sort of get to the core of the tragedy of Cotton's life, because though his actions are inexcusable and unjustifiable, they do stem from his own tragic past. Cotton's repressed trauma and archaic worldview, combined with the fact that society tends to overlook and disrespect both veterans and the disabled, led to an existence where Cotton feels incredibly disrespected, but still incapable of any meaningful change. Cotton is so stubborn about his own worldview, and we see this in the way that he treats his son, his wife, all women, and people in general. And because his worldview is outright offensive to modern society, he is in turn met with disrespect, oftentimes deservedly, but not always. In the episode when Cotton comes marching home, he and Dee Dee are in financial crisis. The bank even repossesses their house. Cotton is forced to get a job and becomes a greeter at a restaurant, but now sitting low on the totem pole in a service industry position, Cotton isn't treated with any semblance of respect.
Whoa, what are you doing?
He was waiting, I'm showing him to a table.
That's the hostess's job. You're a greeter. Now please return to your stool.
Eventually, this disrespect sends Cotton off the deep end when he's told he can't get work off to march in the Veterans Day parade, which to me is really messed up. Cotton doesn't show others much respect, but I'm definitely not cheering for a corporation to take advantage of an old man. And conversely, Cotton is shown to be most happy when he is being treated with respect, even when it's undue, or false respect. In the episode Dale Tech, Cotton starts to stay with Hank, but the family basically doesn't have the time to keep an eye on him, so they put him in an elderly daycare facility. This dashes his spirits pretty significantly, and after he throws a tantrum, the police are called, and he's actually given more respect by the police officers. They even make him an honorary officer to watch over Hank's neighborhood. Now, given his behavior, I definitely don't think Cotton was owed this level of respect, especially given how quickly he abuses his newly perceived power. While trying to solve a mystery for Hank, he nearly whips Bobby and Peggy. Like literally, with a real whip. To his credit, Cotton does eventually solve Hank's mystery for him, but it's fascinating how quickly he abuses his power. The man will do concerning things when he feels he's being treated with high levels of adoration. This actually comes into play in a big way in Death Buys a Timeshare, when Cotton, Bill, and Hank vacation to Mexico to attend a timeshare presentation. The goal is to get a free vacation by refusing to buy the timeshare. Unfortunately, because these timeshare folks are just salesmen trying to get on their customers' good side, they show Cotton an incredibly high degree of respect. He's basically treated like a king, given the nicest suites, invited to exclusive parties, and of course, as Cotton has barely shown respect in his everyday life, he takes to it immediately, and he buys a timeshare.
Colonel, I wasn't supposed to tell you this because you're not an owner yet, but you've already been handpicked by O'Kelly to join his El Presidente circle.
Hank actually comes through for Cotton in a pretty nice way in this episode. The timeshare folks realize that Cotton doesn't have any assets for them to leverage, so they don't sell him a timeshare, but Hank sees how much it means to him.
Since all my buddies kicked off, things just ain't felt right. But now I got me someplace where I belong.
In order to let Cotton spend time at these fancy parties that actually make him feel happy, Hank buys the timeshare himself, a truly selfless act for a man who did not really deserve it. While Cotton is a sad, horrible man, there were those occasional glimpses of humanity in him. However brief, the man definitely loved his grandson Bobby.
But you know, even though he hates most things, he does love Bobby.
Ow!
In fact, he even makes a pretty huge sacrifice for Bobby in Revenge of the Lutefisk. A series of events where Bobby eats all of Reverend Stroop's lutefisk leads to him accidentally setting fire to the entire church, but Cotton ends up being falsely accused of the crime. When Bobby eventually comes clean about the incident, Cotton actually decides he will take the fall because he doesn't want to see Bobby punished for his mistake. This is probably the one truly selfless thing we've ever seen Cotton do, and it's nice that even beneath his awful behavior, there is still love, even if it barely ever shines through. This, of course, does not excuse his excessively awful behavior throughout the series, and to suggest Cotton is actually a good person because of his few truly human moments would be a ludicrous argument to make, but it still gives us some great, genuine, heartfelt moments in the show, and those moments do go a really long way to tug at the heartstrings, even when they're facilitated through Cotton's selfishness. In season 3, Hank and Peggy are trying to get pregnant and have another child, but because of Hank's narrow urethra, they're struggling immensely. Meanwhile, Cotton and Dee Dee get pregnant on accident, which obviously upsets Peggy. But Cotton becomes overwhelmed by the thought of raising a child at his age, and simultaneously actually shows genuine sadness over Hank and Peggy's pregnancy struggles.
Your daddy's the right age to be having babies. Poor Hank and Hank's wife. They want another baby real bad.
Of course, Cotton's solution is still a selfish one. He runs away, abandoning his responsibility as the child's father, and in his mind, gifting his son a child. But obviously, he's really just thrusting the responsibility onto Hank. This leads to probably my favorite Cotton and Hank moment in the entire show, as Hank and Cotton lament their own pregnancy problems.
Hell, if it's a contest on who's the better daddy, you win. I mean, you made Bobby. All I made was you.
It's so impressive how the show is able to give us these scenes that feel like real moments of love and connection between Hank and Cotton, while still allowing Cotton to undercut it with a jab at Hank. Vintage Cotton, truly. And all things considered, it does seem like Cotton improved slightly as a father when raising his next son, Goodhank, or GH for short. I mean, it's wild how even just naming his newborn son was a slight at Hank. But we do see evidence that Cotton was trying harder with GH than he did with Hank. We see that he's got countless home videos of GH that he's taken himself, showing much more care and attention than he did to Hank. At the end of When Cotton Comes Marching Home, he even accepts Hank's financial help for GH's sake.
Hank, I thought it over. I've decided to let you give me some money. You know, for GH.
This is actually one of the biggest instances we've seen of Cotton growing past his own hang-ups. He wouldn't accept help initially because he feels it's his responsibility to provide for his family, and not doing so makes him feel like less of a man. But by accepting Hank's help, he looks beyond his own self-esteem and does the best thing for his child. It's a great moment. But despite these occasional examples of Cotton's growth, his repressed trauma would ultimately follow him to his death. In Cotton's final episode, his PTSD triggers a violent response at a Benihana type restaurant. Cotton ends up breaking bones and badly burning himself on this giant grill, and the doctors give him very little time to live. I think the saddest thing about this episode is the way that Cotton continues to berate and belittle Hank until his literal death. Hank tries so hard to reconcile and make amends with his father, but Cotton wouldn't have it.
I love you too, Dad.
You loves me?
Dad?
What kind of man tells another man he loves him? I don't want to die with my sissy son who loves me.
After this exchange, it looks like Cotton dies, and afterwards Hank fully blames himself. He even claims that he picked a fight with Cotton on his deathbed, which obviously is not what happened. The man just tried to reconcile his complicated feelings with his father. Even while dying, Cotton undermines Hank's well-being. I mean, he requests arguably the most insane thing anyone has ever requested on their deathbed.
I want you to cut off my head and mail it to the Japanese emperor.
Hank tries desperately for the entire rest of the episode to tell his father he loves him. It's kinda sad to watch. It's Hank's last chance to connect with the father who he has desperately sought the approval of his entire life, approval he has never been given, and instead of any type of closure, he's chastised.
I couldn't stand the torture of hearing your baby crying about your daddy dying.
Honestly, one of my favorite moments in all of King of the Hill is Cotton's death, because it so perfectly encapsulates so many important aspects of the series. On his deathbed, Peggy confronts Cotton and chews him out for the way he treated Hank his entire life. Even when Cotton is berating Peggy, she instead defends the man she loves. But it also shows that Peggy, as I claimed earlier, truly understands Cotton. She knew exactly what Cotton needed to hear.
I hope you do go on living forever as the unhappy person you are in the hell you have created here on Earth.
I mentioned that symbiotic antagonistic relationship between these two earlier, and I think this illustrates it perfectly. The man literally wasn't able to die until he found peace through defying this person who he hated most.
I hope you live forever. I really do.
Do you now?
Cotton died the way he lived, defiant, angry, without showing any sort of affection for his son, and all while berating Peggy. But you know Cotton's impact on Hank wasn't going to end with his death, because there's one last episode that really grapples with Cotton's legacy and the shadow his life cast over Hank's. In the final season, Hank is tasked with handling Cotton's will. Hank sees this as his last chance to find meaning in his relationship with his father.
Even dead, Cotton will always find a way to disrupt our lives.
It leads him and his friends on a wild scavenger hunt to ultimately flush Cotton's ashes down General S. Patton's toilet. And while Hank doesn't actually find connection with his father through this misadventure, he does realize that the people Cotton did connect with were his friends, the friends who had also since passed on. And through this realization, he sees the value in the friendships that he has made, and the length that those friends go to help him. And I think this was actually the absolute perfect way to end Hank's saga with Cotton, Because ultimately, though Cotton was an awful father who never gave Hank the love or respect he deserved, Hank was a stronger man, and he was able to achieve a better, more fulfilling life in spite of his father. Hank has a loving wife, an amazing son, and an incredible group of friends, and he did that without the help of Cotton Hill. Hell, he did it while actively fighting against the trauma inflicted on him by Cotton Hill. And this final story represents that beautifully, as Hank learns an important life lesson while dealing with his father's extreme expectations. The ultimate irony is that Cotton was always ashamed of Hank, but Hank was actually one of the only genuine accomplishments in Cotton's life. One of the only good things to come from his legacy. Cotton Hill's life was tragic, but not because he's just a sad or sympathetic figure. His history is heartbreaking for sure, but his life is tragic because his stubbornness created his own personal hell, and the people around him were swept up in it. He's tragic because he made his son's life miserable. He's tragic because he treated people horribly. He's tragic because he was constantly angry and defiant and made people's lives incredibly difficult. In the episode Returning Japanese, Hank has this dreamlike vision in a sweat lodge, and he envisions the one moment he always hoped he could have with his own father.
I waited your whole life to tell you this, boy. You're a good son. And I'm switching to propane.
Thank you, Dad.
All Hank ever wanted was the respect of his dad and a genuine handshake. And would you believe it if I told you that one of the final moments in King of the Hill reflects this? In the very final episode, in one of the final scenes, Hank recognizes something he respects in his own son, Bobby. But instead of reject it or repress it, he embraces it. And he lets Bobby know it, giving him a true and genuine handshake, made even more beautiful with the added context of his father, Cotton. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this very thorough breakdown of the life of Cotton Hill. If you liked it, remember I have a ton of other King of the Hill videos, and I'm really proud of those, so make sure to check out the playlist. Let me know what characters you might want to hear about next. Peace.
Johnny!
Two challenges.